California has decided to deal a blow to Trump's plan to expand immigrant detention centers in the state. Now, let me be clear about something. California isn't great when it comes to these detention centers, but they have refused to expand or add more of these detention centers to house undocumented immigrants, and that's good news. The provision in California stops local jurisdictions from signing new contracts or expanding existing contracts with US Immigration and Customs Enforcement for detaining immigrants. It also requires the state attorney general to conduct reviews of all detention facilities holding immigrants. I think this is good news, but in terms of detention facilities that house undocumented immigrants, California is actually number 2. Only number 2 to Texas.
Wow.
And look, it's a border state, and so I'm not making excuses, but I think California should kind of reevaluate these detention centers to begin with, but I am happy that they're not expanding them. ICE is seeking a $1.2 billion increase in funding for the next fiscal year. The agency's budget calls for nearly $4.9 billion to expand detention capacity to 51,379, with the ability to hold about 49,000 adults and 2,500 families.
The conservatives will say that we, in general, when we support, this story might not technically apply this way, but when we support, like, for example, sanctuary cities, when we suggest that California should continue to have sanctuary cities and should fight the Trump administration every step of the way, they will point out that, but you won't let Oklahoma decide to ban Sharia law.
Right.
And because the conservatives are the one who relied on states' rights in order to deny rights primarily to African Americans for decades and decades and decades, for over 100 years when, well, for a while they didn't have to, because you could just enslave them. But when that became illegal, then we relied on states' rights for 100, and we're still using it today. It's not, for liberals, this isn't about conservatism or isn't about federalism versus states' rights. I am in favor, whether it's from the state of California or hopefully from the federal government, of laws which are just. And when a state does it, I'm for it. When a state has a law that is anti-justice, when a state denies basic rights to human beings, then I want the federal government to step in. When it's the federal government that is denying those basic rights, then I'm in favor of the state stepping up and doing the right thing. We're in favor of doing the right thing. This isn't a constitutional class about federalism or states' rights. Right. And that may be the case here as California carves its own way in fighting the Trump administration as often as possible on immigration.
Yeah, whenever the issue of states' rights comes up, especially when it comes up from the right, it's always about policy that's convenient for them, right? So if it's policy that they're in favor of and they don't want any intervention from the federal government, it's a states' rights issue, right? So gay marriage, for instance. They didn't want gay marriage to be legalized on a federal level, right? Because the red states wanted to continue the prohibition of same-sex marriage. But when it comes to other issues, they want the federal government to get involved, and they want them to get involved aggressively. And so in this case, look, for me, it's not a states' rights versus federal issue. It's about human rights. Yep. It's about, not having this blanket policy of imprisoning undocumented immigrants just to make prisons wealthy and private prisons wealthy, especially before deporting them. I mean, it's completely counterproductive if they're genuine about their concerns about undocumented immigrants. They're concerned that, these undocumented immigrants, they're draining our resources, which of course isn't true. They actually do pay taxes. They actually do pay into Social Security, even though they're never gonna get that money back, right? They do pay sales tax, state taxes, but what's the point of detaining them in these prisons, which taxpayer money goes toward, if you're worried about them draining resources? It just doesn't make any sense. And you look at the stock of private prison companies like Geo Group, and it just completely soared after Obama got elected into office, and continues to do very well in the stock market.
It's modern day slavery. And the interesting thing is that, have you ever talked to somebody who's been in one of these detention centers?
I mean, I've done a lot of stories about them. And actually, yes, I have. On Monday, the reason why I wasn't here is because Google has been doing really great work in regard to criminal justice reform. And they're specifically focusing on people who have been imprisoned with life sentences due to nonviolent drug crimes. And so we had the opportunity to speak to a woman named Miss Alice, and she lost her job, was a single mother, was extremely desperate, had never done any drugs, and got involved in trafficking. And she got convicted of drug conspiracy and was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Had a completely clean record, right? And so, yeah, you hear about the situation she's dealing with. You hear about, just the inhumane treatment that these people are dealing with.
Yeah. They get raped, they get beat up, they get mistreated, they're not getting fed. And what I think is like, every time I have a conversation with somebody, a friend who's a comedian who's very conservative and feels like every time you support anything in favor of immigration rights, you're supporting crime. Like you're indirectly supporting crime because immigrants equal crime.
Which is not true.
Which is not true. But if you're gonna detain immigrants that you think are dangerous and you're gonna put them in those places, then go after the gang members that are the ones who are the criminals, the MS-13 guys or those. Why are you detaining? I know someone whose mom was in a detention center and she's forever changed. Yeah. She'll never be the same because of the stuff that happened to her, and then she's afraid to talk about it because she got out and she
doesn't want to go back.
She doesn't want to go back, but it's just not. Those of you people who talk about the rights of the people in this country and how we pride ourselves in being unlike third world countries, that we are people that pride ourselves in knowing how to treat human beings, that we have the right to happiness and the pursuit of happiness and life and liberty. If you really believe that, then you don't believe that people should be treated like dogs.
That's right.
And that's really
Is your conservative comedian friend funny?
No, none of them are.
Yeah, I mean,
I said it.
Our prison system has no interest in rehabilitating people. It's all punitive at this point. Last week was a really hard week because a friend of mine found out that her brother committed suicide. And when he was in middle school, he was caught with a little bit of pot. He ended up in juvenile hall. And while he was there, he was introduced to harder drugs. And he was all of a sudden taking heroin. And he was severely addicted to heroin and in and out of the prison system his whole life. And finally, last week, it just got so bad that he decided to take his own life. And so that's what our prison system is. This was a kid who, by the way, this was a white Jewish kid, okay? So it could happen to anyone. This was a kid who did what a lot of kids do. They're not bad people, they're not violent, they have no reason to be in prison or jail or juvie, and their lives get turned upside down, all because there is this huge incentive now, a financial incentive to put people away for nonviolent offenses.
Young Turks membership creates independent media.
Believe me.
No ads.
Believe me.
All the shows.
Believe me.
On demand.
Believe me.
Support independent media.
Believe me.
It's awesome, tremendous, you'll love it.
Believe me.
And by the end, you'll be thinking,
I'm like a smart person.
tytnetwork.com/join.